Good afternoon, everyone. It's Sandy Dunn from Bourne, Ontario. Just to let you know, we will be getting started in approximately 2 minutes, right on the dot of noon. So if you can just hold tight for a couple of minutes, we'll be ready to go. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Sandy Dunn, Knowledge Translation Specialist at Bourne, Ontario. I'd like to welcome you to our Bourne Provincial Rounds. We are just set up to go, and I'm just going to check very quickly. Am I coming across loud and clear? Can everyone hear? Val, can you hear my voice?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly, Sandy.
Okay, that's great. So I would like to take the opportunity to start off, just give you a little information about our guest speaker today and our topic. Christine McRoberts is going to present for us today. She's the Senior Technologist in the Newborn Screening Ontario Laboratory. And Christine is a member of the College of Medical Lab Technologists of Ontario and has over 30 years' experience in laboratory technology. Christine is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the Newborn Screening Lab, and this includes providing technical support to the technologists and technicians, development of new assays and technologies in the lab, troubleshooting instrument and quality control issues, and liaising with other departments. And Christine has a wealth of experience with this and is a wonderful resource to be able to learn from in relation to our topic, which is related to newborn screening samples, one of the key performance indicators on our new maternal newborn dashboard, which was launched across Ontario in November of 2012. And the key performance indicator on the dashboard is the rate of unsatisfactory newborn screening samples. And so the focus of today's Bourne Provincial Rounds is around the issue of unsatisfactory screening samples. What makes a satisfactory newborn screening sample satisfactory versus unsatisfactory? And so Christine is going to go through some basic information for you and review the concepts and criteria that Newborn Screening Ontario uses, and then talk about some issues related to how to improve practice. We will address questions after the presentation just for efficiency's sake. So if you can just hold off, you will be able to either call in to the phone line. If you press 01 on your telephone keypad, you'll be able to be placed in the telephone queue. Press 02 to take yourself out of the telephone queue, or you can type in a question in the chat box on your screen. But we will wait for the end of the presentation to address questions. So I'll hand it over to Christine, and we will get started on our talk.
Thank you, Sandy. Welcome to the webinar, everyone. What makes a newborn screening sample satisfactory? And thank you for your interest in improving the quality of samples collected for the newborn screen. One of the challenges the Newborn Screening Ontario program faces, or NSO, Every day is the receipt of samples which are unsuitable for testing. NSO receives approximately 145,000 samples per year from submitting healthcare facilities and practitioners, approximately 2.6% of which are unsatisfactory. That translates into greater than 3,700 samples rejected annually. The objectives of this presentation are to discuss the rationale for NSO's insistence for high-quality samples, to establish the criteria of what makes a satisfactory newborn screening sample, and to share strategies to decrease the incidence of rejected newborn screening samples. There are several potential consequences of refusing to test a newborn screening sample. Rejection of a sample puts babies at risk by potentially delaying the identification of a screen-positive baby. Rejection of a sample places additional stress on both the baby and their family as a result of the need to collect a second sample, and it may result in a misscreen if the parents do not consent to a second sample collection. Rejected samples create an increased workload on you, the submitter, in locating and retrieving the baby and recollecting the sample, and rejected samples place an increased workload on NSO in processing, reporting, and following up on the unsatisfactory sample and the repeat sample. There are two types of unsatisfactory samples received by Newborn Screening Ontario. The first type of unsatisfactory sample is referred to as a data unsat. Data unsats are missing key pieces of information essential for test interpretation and reporting. Date and time of birth and date and time of sample collection are considered critical fields. NSO uses these fields to calculate how old the baby was when the sample was taken. This information is important for accurate interpretation of the test results. If missing, the NSO Lab Information System disorder logic defaults to the most conservative determination. This may result in an unnecessary retrieval of a baby, which would be screen negative had the critical information been available. Incomplete demographics can also delay the location and a retrieval of a screen-positive baby. Submitters are contacted to obtain missing demographic information, but if that information is not obtained within a reasonable time period, the sample is reported as unsatisfactory based on insufficient data. Samples may also be reported as unsatisfactory if collected when the baby is less than 24 hours of age, or if the sample is greater than 14 days old when received in the lab. Samples taken at less than 24 hours and those received at greater than 14 days since collection will be analyzed and will be reported if indicated, but a repeat sample will be requested. Samples collected on a newborn screening blood collection card that has expired will also be reported as unsatisfactory. Before collecting the newborn screening sample, ensure that the blood card or blood collection device has not expired. Each blood dot card has an expiry date, which can be found in the upper right-hand corner of the card next to the hourglass symbol. Samples collected on an expired card will be tested and followed up on if indicated, but again, a repeat sample will be requested. The second type of unsatisfactory sample is referred to as a lab unsat. A sample that is rejected due to insufficient quantity or poor quality will not be tested, as it may lead to unreliable results. A second sample will be requested. When reporting unsatisfactory samples, we frequently hear the comment that submitters who have been doing the newborn screening collection for years without ever having a sample rejected are now having their samples refused. Prior to 2006, babies were being screened for only 2 disorders. NSO now screens for 28 disorders and soon to be 29. The technology used is far more sensitive than that used previously, which necessitates our requesting a higher volume and better quality sample. To understand why we insist on high-quality samples to perform the newborn screen, it helps to have some understanding of sample transport, receipt, carrier provider, as you guys know, is CAMPAR. As submitters, you each have a CAMPAR account, and NSO covers the shipping costs for newborn screening samples shipped to our lab. Please do not batch your newborn screening samples at your institution. Send the newborn screening samples to us as soon as possible after collection, if workable, on the same day. Samples should be allowed to dry at room temperature for at minimum 3 hours before the protective flap is closed and the sample is packaged for delivery. If you have limited space to allow the samples to dry, a metal CD rack makes a great drying rack for newborn screening samples. The packaging system used to transport dried blood spot specimens by mail or carrier must meet the basic triple packaging system. In Ontario, our blood spot collection card incorporates the filter paper portion onto which the collected blood is absorbed, and an attached fold-over cover, which is placed in the CAMPAR outer protective envelope. The blood absorbed onto the paper is considered the first protective barrier, and the protective flap the second. Placing the properly closed blood collection card in the CAMPAR envelope satisfies the triple barrier recommendation. Please avoid the use of Ziploc plastic bags. If the sample is placed in a plastic bag before it is completely dry, the sample integrity may be affected. We sometimes receive samples in plastic Ziploc bags which are so well sealed that they are still wet when we receive them in the lab. Opening the package containing the samples is in itself very time-consuming, so there's no need to staple, tape, or paperclip the protective flap over the collected dried blood spots. The protective flap is sufficient to protect the sample. Samples are delivered to the newborn screening lab daily, Monday to Friday. From most locations in Ontario, samples picked up by CAMPAR are received in the lab next day. We receive approximately 400 to 500 blood collection cards per day, with the exception being Tuesday. On Tuesday, we receive anywhere from 1,000 to 1,400 samples. Samples are not shipped on weekends or stat holidays, as the costs are significantly higher on these days, and the logistics required for sample shipping and receipt for most institutions are not typically in place on weekends and holidays. The disorders we screen for typically do not manifest themselves until after the first couple of days of life. This still allows us with the opportunity to identify these babies before they become symptomatic, providing samples are collected and shipped to us in a timely manner. It is very important that you do not batch your newborn screening samples. Upon receipt in the lab, all blood cards are reviewed for sample quality and quantity. In an effort to minimize the number of rejected or unsatisfactory samples, any samples which are initially considered unsatisfactory are set aside and reevaluated by a second and sometimes even a third staff member before being coded as unsatisfactory. We do not take the rejection of a sample lightly, and we will do our best to use whatever you send us, if at all possible. Submitters are notified of any unsatisfactory samples same day by telephone. This phone call is made to allow for prompt sample recollection if by some chance the baby has not been discharged. The unsatisfactory sample report is faxed to the submitter within 24 hours. It is the responsibility of the submitting healthcare provider to arrange for the repeat sample to be collected. Once verified as satisfactory, samples are given a unique identifier barcode. The barcoded demographic section is sent to the lab office for data entry. The identically barcoded filter paper segment, which contains the sample or dried blood spot, remains in the lab to be assayed. The sample barcode links the sample demographics entered in the NSO office to the sample results in the lab information system. Barcoded patient samples, calibrators, and quality control material are punched into the barcoded 96 well plates. Each plate is unique to a particular assay. As each sample barcode is scanned and punched into the 96 well plates used for the newborn screen, requests are generated for each assay performed. A final report is not issued until all of the requests have been satisfied. So what are the reasons that samples are rejected? In order to ensure the successful completion of all screening assays on the NSO panel, we request submitters collect a blood collection card with 5 circles homogeneously and completely saturated with blood. A minimum of 8 3.2 millimeter punches must be available for the sample to be considered satisfactory. A punch is an excised circle of the absorbed blood taken from the filter paper blood collection card, which is subsequently used for testing. The photo in the slide demonstrates the size of the punches we require relative to the size of the circles of blood on the blood collection card. It's estimated that 75 microliters of blood is required to fill one of the 5 circles on the NSO blood collection card. With the exception of the screening test for hemoglobinopathies, the newborn screening assays are quantitative or semi-quantitative. The calculations used to determine the final concentration of the test analytes in the newborn screening blood spot sample assume that each 3.2 millimeter punch used in the assays contains precisely 3.1 microliters of blood. Any deviation from this volume could result in an unreliable newborn screen. A positive screen may be the consequence of either an elevated or decreased result value. So therefore, we cannot accept samples which have too much blood, which we call supersaturated, or too little blood, quantity of blood insufficient. Based on the reason for sample rejection, numerical codes are applied to the unsatisfactory samples. Code 001 is a sample which is of too little quantity to allow us to complete the entire newborn screening test panel. We do not at this time perform partial panels. The sample in this slide appears to be satisfactory from the front of the card. However, when the card is viewed from the back, you can see that the blood did not saturate completely through to the back of the card. The applied blood must soak fully through the filter paper so that no areas of white are visible from either the front or back of the card where the blood has been applied. To achieve this, when collecting the sample, try to amass a large enough volume of blood at the puncture site to completely fill the circle with one application. After applying the blood drop, confirm that the blood has saturated completely through to the back of the card. If not, another blood drop may be applied to the same side of the card. Do not apply blood to both sides of the blood collection card. If it seems unlikely a good blood spot will be achieved from the first application of blood, it is acceptable to move on to the next circle, this time trying to apply a larger blood drop, completely saturating through to the back of the card. Code 002 is given to a sample that looks scratched or abraded. When we apply a code 002 to a sample, it indicates that the surface of the filter paper has been disturbed during a too aggressive application process. During collection, bring the accumulated blood drop in contact with the surface of the filter paper and allow the paper to absorb the blood fluently without using the heel to force the blood through the filter paper. If the surface of the filter paper is disturbed, it can no longer be assumed that the volume of blood in a 3.2 millimeter punch is 3.1 microliters. Using a scratched or abraded sample may result in erroneous newborn screening results. Satisfactory blood samples can be obtained using a sterile, plain, or anticoagulant-free capillary tube. In some circumstances, venipuncture may be the most suitable method for blood collection. Blood should not be collected from an extremity into which IV fluids are being or have recently been infused, as the blood sample may be contaminated, affecting test results. Both of the samples shown in this slide are samples coded 002. Notice the rough appearance of the surface of the filter paper, which makes it difficult to evaluate the quantity of blood absorbed onto the filter paper. To avoid damaging the filter paper fibers, allow only the blood drop to touch the surface of the filter paper. Do not color in or dab the blood onto the card or use any technique that might scratch compress, or indent the paper. During the application of the blood to the card, try to apply the blood from the capillary tube or syringe to the surface of the filter paper without disturbing the paper's surface, as this may create a scratched or abraded appearance. These samples appear to have been applied by tapping the filled capillary tube onto the filter paper. See how the blood spot has a moonscape-looking appearance. The filter paper is compressed in some areas, again making it difficult to evaluate the quantity of blood absorbed onto the paper. If collecting a capillary or venous sample, please avoid the use of anticoagulants. The use of anticoagulants may interfere with some laboratory tests. EDTA can cause false positive results when using time-resolved immunofluorescent methods, and heparin is a known PCR inhibitor, so may interfere with some DNA-based assays, such as CFTR mutation detection and severe combined immunodeficiency. Code 003 samples appear wet and discolored. When collecting a newborn screening sample, before applying the blood to the collection card, make sure the heel is clean and dry to avoid any contamination or dilution of the sample. Keep the collection area free of lotions, creams, feeding formulas, or anything which might contaminate the sample. We cannot use samples which are contaminated with water, alcohol, or other solutions. Code 004 is given to a sample that is over or supersaturated with blood. Note the wrinkled appearance which the filter paper assumes when oversaturated. We have seen a significant increase in the number of supersaturated samples received in the lab. We believe that this is a reaction to submitters having previously received unsatisfactory reports for samples that were of insufficient quantity. Supersaturated or layer samples may result in falsely elevated concentrations of analytes, which increases the risk of a false negative screen in cases where a low value is considered out of range. Code 005, blood spots appear diluted. Diluted blood samples may produce results with incorrect normal analyte values, resulting in a false negative screen in cases where a high value is considered out of range. Code 006, these blood spots exhibit serum rings, which are usually caused by excessive milking or squeezing of the puncture site. This might cause hemolysis of the specimen or result in the dilution of the blood sample with tissue fluids and adversely affect sample results. Please try to avoid excessive squeezing of the baby's heel during the sample collection. Code 007 applies to samples which are either clotted or layered. In this picture, note the visible clots on the blood collection card. During the sample application, apply the blood quickly so that it does not clot during application to the filter paper. If using a capillary or syringe to transfer the blood, be sure the blood does not clot before it has been applied to the filter paper. Layered samples. If after applying the initial drop of blood, the blood has not saturated completely through the backside of the card, another blood drop may be applied to the same side of the card. Try not to overlap or layer the blood, but we will avoid using any areas of the blood spot where we can see that the blood is layered, but we will use areas where we can see that the blood is not layered. So do all 5 circles of the blood spot card really have to be completely filled? If a portion of the blood spots are supersaturated, scratched and abraded, or in some other way not suitable for analysis, but we are still able to identify 8 good areas from which we can successfully obtain satisfactory blood punches, we will accept the card. It is better to successfully fill 2 or 3 of the circles on the blood card then to partially fill all 5. Please keep in mind that if all 5 circles of the card are not filled, the circles which are must be of satisfactory quality for us to use. Our acceptance criteria is both qualitative and quantitative. So in the slide, the first or the top blood collection card has been accepted, and only 3 of the circles were filled. And in the card on the bottom, an attempt was made to fill all 5 circles, but that sample was rejected because we weren't able to see 8 areas where we could take successful punches. Every effort will be made to avoid rejecting a newborn screening sample. This is an example of a sample that scarcely meets our minimum criteria for acceptance. On days when the technicians are processing over 1,000 samples, punching difficult samples can significantly slow things down. Note the directions handwritten on the card as an aid to the technician punching the card. After completing your sample collection, please allow the sample to dry completely before closing the protective flap. If you don't, the paper flap may adhere to the applied blood. Upon receipt of the sample in the lab, a portion of the blood may be removed when opening the protective flap to access the sample. This can create a scratched and abraded appearance to the surface of the blood circle and reduce the quantity of blood in the sample. The protective flap should never be used to compress the filter paper to force an insufficient quantity of blood through to the reverse side of the card. Poor quality and unsatisfactory specimens place an unnecessary burden on the screening system. Retesting requires additional follow-up, which if not completed in a timely manner, could result in missed or late diagnosed cases. Sample recollection causes unnecessary trauma to the newborn and anxiety to the parents. Because of the influence that specimen quality has on test results, care must be taken by you when collecting the samples and at our end when evaluating the samples for acceptance for the newborn screening test. If there is ever doubt as to the acceptability of a sample that you have collected, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we will do our best to provide you with the tools you need to make a good decision.
Thank you, Christine. That's a wonderful overview of information. I think we'll just take a minute to swing over our screen here to be able to see the chat box, and we will open up the lines to the audience for questions. I'd just like to make a couple of points here before we start. As I said before, if you are interested in sharing some information with us about some success stories you might have had in your organization addressing some issues with unsatisfactory sample rates, we would like to hear those anecdotes as well. And if you have any more questions related to some of the information that Christine covered or that actually wasn't addressed, that is some other question, please feel free to either press 01 and put your call into the queue or 02 to take yourself out of the queue, and I will check with Val to first start us off and see if there are any questions in the queue, in the phone queue. Anybody in the phone queue yet, Val?
Let me just check one moment. Nope, there's no questions in the queue right now.
Okay, so I'm going to scroll to the screen and we'll look for questions in the chat box. I'd also like to just mention, as I do that, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the webinar and the slides will be posted on the Bourne website, as are our other provincial round webinars. And in addition, Newborn Screening Ontario has a wealth of information on their website that is available to address criteria around satisfactory, unsatisfactory screening samples and the purpose of all of this screening. And related to the newborn screening unsatisfactory sample key performance indicator on our Bourne maternal newborn dashboard, on our dashboard web page, the site on our Bourne website, the information and the link to the newborn screening information is also available. So there should be a number of ways that you can access information if you haven't already found it yourself. So just looking at the questions now, I just have to make my mouse work. Okay, audio. Okay, I can see we had some audio problems before we started those, so that's okay. One question, what is in the collection cards that would expire? I'm going to switch places with Christine and let her be close to the mic, and
that's a good question. I think mainly it relates to the compression of the cards. So because we're actually dealing with a volume of blood, not just like taking the blood off the surface of the blood card, it's important that the depth of the filter paper be the appropriate depth so that we get the correct volume of blood. So over time, the cards will compress and probably dry up a bit. So I think it's important. That's why they put an expiry date on the cards.
Okay, we have another question. Does CanPAR do pickups twice a day? Is a question from Joanna.
Actually, that's a good question. I think they would if you arranged it through your facility, but I think if you're doing that just for newborn screening, then I don't think that's really necessary. Like if your samples are being collected in the morning, then to have your pickup in the afternoon, you should be able to get them dried by then, and then on the CanPAR pickup that same day. And if the samples haven't had sufficient time to dry, then it would be okay to allow those samples to go on the next day. We want you to send them as soon as possible after collection, but probably a one-a-day pickup is sufficient.
I see a question here, and I'm not quite sure that I understand it, but it says, do you have an order of CIRL? And I'm not sure if that is meant to say, is there an order of circles in which circle filling should happen? Does that make a difference? I have been asked that question before, and no, it doesn't. Generally, people start at one side and just work their way over. And it is important to know, like from that one slide, you can see that we don't always need all 5 circles filled. We asked for all 5 circles because sometimes the quality in one circle isn't acceptable, so we want to go to the next circle. So if you started on one side of the card and it hasn't been successful, go ahead and move on to the next circle and try your application there, trying to get more blood accumulated before you start the collection, and that might work out better for you, but it doesn't matter which side you go. Apply your blood, though, to the front side of the card. So that's the card that actually has the circles on the filter paper. We take our punches from the back side, and that's to make sure that we can see that the blood is saturated through all the way to the back. So we prefer that you apply your blood to the front, and we punch from the back. But we can tell if you're doing it the opposite way, and we'll then punch from the front of the card. Shirley asks, how long do you recommend for drying? Previously, it was 6 hours. Is that about the same, or? CLSI recommends 3 hours. So 3 to 4 hours sitting in an ambient room temperature. We don't want you to use anything to heat dry the samples. So just sitting at room temperature with the flap open just for 3 hours should be enough. Okay. I think there's a couple of questions in there about that. There is a question from the Barrie midwives about best practices. I'm sorry, my screen keeps jumping. That's why I'm a little hesitant here. Best practices for timing and method of collection. Now, I know Christine has gone through that. I'm not sure if there's any more information that you can add, Christine, or... Basically, we ask that you collect the sample after 24 hours, and the best time is between 24 hours and 72 hours. Now, we do
say like after 24 hours and within 7 days is acceptable. And we do accept samples that are taken after 7 days, but we'll apply a different reference ranges to those samples. So it's important for us to know that the baby is greater than 7 days old when the sample was collected. I know quite often at 24 hours the babies are not as well hydrated, and so waiting for till the baby is 3 to 5 days of old is a common practice, but I think 24 to 72 hours is ideal.
Okay. Another question about drying time, which I think has been addressed. From Laurel, why are samples sent before a baby is over 24 hours old if we know they have to be poked again?
So that's because for a lot of the tests that we do, the sample is satisfactory for under 20, or if the sample is collected less than 24 hours. But for some of the tests that we do, the sample isn't satisfactory. So we want you to take that sample when the baby is less than 24 hours, because if that mom goes home, there is that opportunity or chance that the mom may not come back and get the sample recollected. So at least we've got one, somewhat completed newborn screen on that baby. So that's why we ask you. I know it seems silly that the baby's going to go home and you're going to call them back in again, but for a lot of the tests that we're doing, we would be able to pick up the disorder on that sample that is taken at less than 24 hours.
From Mackenzie Health, can you please provide the number to call if staff have any questions regarding samples?
Okay, you can call me. That's Christine, and you can call me at 613-738-3222, extension 3463. And that'll get me, and I'm in the lab, and I'll be happy to try and talk to you about whatever issue you're having. Of course, I can't see the sample that you've collected, so I can't guarantee, that I can give you the answer that you want, that the sample's okay. But I can certainly, we can talk about it and try and make a good decision about whether or not you need to repeat the sample right away or whether you should send that one. Some people will send me, if they feel that a sample is unsatisfactory, they'll go ahead and collect the second sample and send both samples to me and just flag one that says for Christine's review or something. And that way I can provide you with feedback that, that sample wasn't good, or we probably could have been gotten away with that sample. And that just helps you to draw the line between what a good sample is and what a bad sample is. So I'm happy to give that kind of feedback if you want to send two samples, one that you think is questionable and another one that is good. I'm just going to pause for a sec and check with Val to see if we have any questions in the phone line, phone queue.
Hi, Sandy. No, we don't have any questions right now in the queue.
Okay, we'll just continue with the chat box here. There's a few more. So Chris asks a question about what method are you using for heel warming? Examples, please. Any recommendations there? I can only base that on what I've heard from feedback from you guys, the submitters that are collecting the samples. I know that there are commercial devices that people use. The recommended temperature is around 41 degrees centigrade. Some people just use a warm washcloth. Other people will use a diaper, a warm diaper. I think even just swaddling the baby and getting the baby very warm, allowing the baby to nurse during the collection helps. The baby becomes more relaxed. They're more comfortable. And if you can get the baby really swaddled warm and then just have the heel poking out and do your blood collection that way, I think people have a lot of success with that. Lynn is asking, how long can you Lynn's asking two questions. How long can you keep the completed card in the car? And what happens if you take the sample after 72 hours? Sorry. So the sample taken after 72 hours is perfectly fine. We will test the sample no matter how old the baby is. What happens is after 7 days, after the baby is 7 days, we'll apply a different set of reference ranges. So after 72 hours is fine. I know a lot of midwives, I think, collect their babies, the sample at around 5 days because that's when they make their home visit.
As far as keeping the sample in the car, I don't recommend that at all. The temperatures in the car can fluctuate quite a bit, getting very cold and very hot in the summer. And some of the analytes that we're measuring in the blood spot are enzymes, and so if exposed to heat, those analytes are going to become degraded pretty quickly, so we don't want that to happen. So it might be better. I know it's a problem when you're doing visits and you have nowhere to dry the samples, but we would prefer that you don't keep those samples out in the car just because of the fluctuations in temperature.
Okay, Lise asks, what type of capillary tubes can be used for collection of blood?
Any type of capillary tube that can be used. I think most people are using plastic ones now because of the danger of using a glass tube because it might break. What we ask is that it not have any anticoagulant in it, and that's because of the effect that anticoagulants can have on the blood, or on our assays. So any commercial capillary tube is fine.
Okay. St. Joseph General, do all technicians check that 8 punches can be retrieved before rejecting a sample?
Yes, and that's a good question. I wish you could see how much care is taken whenever we're reviewing the samples in the morning. So as the samples are unpackaged, they're quickly reviewed for to see whether or not they're satisfactory. Anything that's even questionable is set aside and put in a second pile, and that pile is reviewed again by a second or even third technician. And then what happens is I review each one of those cards every day, and I do put some back into circulation, and sometimes with consultation with the girls that are actually doing the punching, but we take a lot of care to really use every bit of blood that you've given us. So yes, we will use it if we can find those 8 spots.
That's great. Diana asks, so just to clarify, a sample cannot be collected after the age of 14 days. Is that correct?
No. What I meant by that is we will test a sample that is greater than 14 days old since the sample has been collected. So if you've collected a sample and because of transportation issues or maybe it got set aside and it was neglected to be sent, if the sample is greater than 14 days old, we will test that sample, but because the sample is 14 days old, we're not sure about the quality of the results anymore. So we will request another sample. But if the baby's greater than 14 days old, that's okay. We prefer, because of the type of disorders that we're testing, that those samples be collected when the baby's younger. But we will test the sample regardless of the baby's age. It's the age of the sample itself that I was referring to that we will reject if it's greater than 14 days.
Okay. Joanna asks, what are your recommendations for the baby's position while taking the sample? Skin to skin, breastfeeding? I know you had just mentioned breastfeeding. Maybe can you elaborate on that a little bit, Christine?
I think breastfeeding it can be really successful, and certainly use gravity. Gravity is your friend. So if you want to even hold the baby up on mom's shoulder with the foot hanging down below, that will allow the blood to flow down.
And skin to skin is always a benefit for babies, moms and babies at any time. So certainly, along with breastfeeding or the baby being held skin to skin, also facilitates some warming up the baby and being nice and cuddly with the gravity and dependency of the limb is good. Joanna also asked a question. On the back of the card, number 6 states not to submit later than 48 hours after blood collection. On the back of the card,
okay.
Number 6.
Number 6 states that. I think basically what that's saying is don't hang on to those samples. So I know on weekends, hopefully if you have collected a sample on Friday, you can actually get that into the CAMPAR circulation on the Friday, and we would receive that sample on Monday. If you've collected on Saturday or Sunday, you are going to have to hold on to that sample until CAMPAR pick up on Monday. But we would ask that 2 days would be the maximum that you would hold on to that sample.
Okay. Can a sample be taken from a heparinized line if a discard tube is taken first?
When you say a heparinized line, can I assume that the heparin then has been temporarily
Umbilical line, probably, or an arterial line.
taken? So then, yes, like as long as you
Would be flowing in the solution, though, would be.
it would still be flowing in the syrup. So from what Sandy's saying and describing that, because I'm not really familiar for sure what you're talking about, but if the sample is contaminated with heparin, then we will still test that sample, but the risk now is because we are testing for CFTR, which is a DNA-based assay, as well as we will soon be testing for SCID. Both of those assays are PCR dependent, and heparin can inhibit the PCR reaction. So what would happen is we might not be able to use that sample successfully in the analysis, and we'd have to repeat a second or request a repeat sample anyways. It's not going to, for the SCID or the CF, cause a false negative positive result. It just means that the test won't work.
Berry midwives meant type of lancet and waiting until 4 or 5 days if the baby is not well hydrated. Not sure. That maybe it's related to an earlier question. I don't know, which I don't see. Best practices for timing and method of collection. And so the clarification of that question was, what are the best practices for the type of lancet and waiting until 4 to 5 days if the baby's not well hydrated? I think you've addressed you can wait 4 to 5 days if need be. Is there any recommendation you can make about the type of lancet at all?
I don't have any particular recommendation, but I think most of you are using commercial ones that control the depth. So when you're taking the sample, you want to take it from the side of the heels. You don't want to take it from the back of the heel because you can damage the heel if you do that. And you don't want your incision, your depth incision, to be any greater than 2 millimeters.
Okay. Chris asked the question, are there any alterations in time frame collection for preemies? There's preterm babies. Would there be any difference in the timing of the test?
There are new recommendations coming out as far as collections for preemies. I don't have those in front of me right now, but that is a really good question because I know it's a topic that is current. I'd like to maybe take down your information and I can give you a more thorough answer to that because I'd like to check and just make sure where that is at. But definitely there are recommendations as to timing of collections in premature infants.
Okay, so this is Chris Purdon. So perhaps Chris can contact you.
That's right,
Christine.
Yep.
And do you have an email? Did you put it in the slide?
I didn't put it in the slide, but my email is cmcroberts. So that's CMCROBERTS at cheo.on.ca. And if you send me your question, I'll forward it on to one of the genetic counselors, and they'll be able to give you a more thorough answer to that question.
Okay, that's great. Another question from Deanne. Can samples be sent through the pneumatic tube system in an open high biohazard bag?
I think once the samples are dry and you've closed that protective flap, you can put them in your biohazard bag to ship them through that pneumatic tube. It seems you're going to have to put them in something. You don't want them to sort of free fall through there. So I think that's acceptable. Once they get to the lab, though, it's preferable that they take it out of that bag and just send it to us in the CAMPAR envelope.
Okay. Rosie is asking how much does it cost each test? How much does each test cost?
I don't know the current answer to that one, Rosie, so that's another one that if you wanted to email me, I could follow up with some of the bean counters and see if I can get an answer to that.
Okay. Here's some information about the premature infant question. Christine from Newborn Screening, Ontario, is saying significantly premature, less than 33 weeks gestational age, or very low birth weight, less than 1,500 grams babies should have a first newborn screening specimen collected between 24 and 72 hours of age.
Thanks, Christine.
A second specimen collected at 3 weeks of age or when the baby is being discharged home from hospital, whichever comes first. So there's two recommendations around the preterm infant. Less than 33 weeks gestational age, less than 1,500 gram babies should have the first newborn screening sample collected between 24 to 72 hours, and a second specimen collected at 3 weeks of age or at discharge home from hospital, whichever comes first. And Christine's referring us all to the bulletin on the newborn screening website, www.newbornscreening, all one word, .on.ca. So you will be able to find information specific to premature infants on Newborn Screening Ontario's website. So I'll pause for a minute. That appears to be all our questions in the chat box. Val, did any calls ever come in in the phone queue?
No, we have no questions in the queue, Cindy.
Okay, I have a question, actually, or a comment related to some feedback that we have certainly heard, and we are very eager to receive feedback from people about the value that having the unsatisfactory sample key performance indicator has made for you and your organizations to identify this performance indicator, to gather or gain a sense, gain an idea of, how the significance of the issue in your organization or not, and to give you some direction to start to do an audit or backtrack through to find out what are the predominant reasons why unsatisfactory samples are happening, whether they're data related, requisition related, or whether they're actually sample related, so that you can look within your organization at your policies and practices and performances and people that are involved in collecting the sample in order to develop strategies to address issues that you can identify. And so we're always, at Bourne, we're always interested to hear feedback. And one of the comments that we did receive a question about was related to hospitals where there are different people who are involved in the blood collection. So in some groups, some areas, nurses collect blood from newborns, or in some areas, lab personnel collect the blood. And so generally the Bourne Information System, access to the Bourne Information System and the dashboard is on the clinical areas with the designated users in any given hospital. It is not, the lab don't enter data directly from the lab, and so the lab personnel wouldn't necessarily know from the perspective of what a hospital's rate is. They would receive feedback, as Christine's talked about, directly from Newborn Screening Ontario about some issues related to the lab end of things. And so I wonder, Christine, if you could comment on this issue. If hospitals find there's a discrepancy, is it sort of optimum that they really need to work together, the clinicians, the administrators, and the lab personnel, to look at the big picture issue and to, be able to identify if there are lab-related issues, if there are documentation-related issues, if there's specific personnel or training-related issues that need to be addressed. I don't know if you can comment on that.
I think it is a common thing, because quite often what happens is the initial screening sample is taken by nurses on the floor, and then the sample is sent to the lab. So we're calling the lab about the repeat sample, and they are responsible for, the recollection of that sample. And there's no connection made, with the floor, letting them know that, a lot of their samples are possibly, having to be recollected. And so I think that is a frustration. So I think each center needs to have some kind of feedback mechanism, so both everybody involved in the newborn screening collection knows what's going on. It's really helpful if you have a key person or a contact person that sort of takes responsibility for the newborn screening end of things in your facility, so that they can sort of keep a check on, what's going on and make sure that there's good feedback going on between everybody involved.
Thank you. Here I have another question. Dina asks, if positive results occur, how much time until parents are notified? How much time would pass before parents would be notified?
When we have a positive result, our genetic counselors report it to the treatment center that is in the area where that baby resides. So the positive result is not initially reported right back to the submitter. It's reported to the treatment centers, which are across the province. And those treatment centers, based on what the disorder is, but will immediately start to make attempts to retrieve that baby and do follow-up diagnostic testing. So when we have a positive sample, it is reported on the same day that we get that positive result.
We have another notice here from Newborn Screening Ontario that says, follow Newborn Screening Ontario on Twitter at NBS_Ontario. That's great. We have a Twitter link now. Joanna makes a comment, when a recollection is required, why is someone in the lab as well as someone in the unit both notified within an organization?
I think the reason that might be happening is we may be contacting, so in the lab, on the same day that we receive your unsatisfactory sample, we do make that phone call to notify you, and that mainly is because if that baby's still there, it's a lot easier for you to do that recollection. What might be happening is that the faxed report, which is sent out either that day or the next day, might be going up to the floor. So there might be some, like you say, duplication of notification. And I think that sometimes can be confusing because people then say, well, is that the same unsatisfactory sample or is it a different one? So there again, it's important to streamline that in your hospital to try and make sure that the reports are all going back to that same person or being linked at some point.
That's great. That's all the questions in the chat box. Any other, anything else that anyone can think of? Val, any calls in the phone queue?
Nope, there are no questions in the queue.
Okay. Any other last-minute thoughts or key messages or anything, Christine, you want to pass on to people? So contact phone number for Christine again is
613-738-3222, extension 3463.
And your email address?
cmcroberts, CMCROBERTS @cheo.on.ca.
And Christine's more than happy to receive additional questions, issues, discuss different ways to deal with some of the identified reasons for unsatisfactory samples happening. So please feel free to be sure to make contact in the future if need be. You can always contact Born Ontario. We can also filter through questions and find out information for you. Please remember this webinar has been recorded, and the webinar and the slides themselves will be posted on the Born website for future use. Please tell your colleagues who have not had the opportunity to join us today that they are available. They probably won't be posted for a day or so, but they will be there eventually in the future. So it is just coming up to 1. I think there are no more questions in our chat box, so I think we will sign off for today. We thank you all very much for joining us. This is has been a wonderful presentation, a wonderful question and answer period, a very important issue addressing one of our key performance indicators on our maternal newborn dashboard. We hope you found the information useful and look forward to working with you again in the future. We will have another Bourne Provincial Rounds in March 21st. Stay tuned for the announcement that will come out earlier in March about that. And we wish you all a great day. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye now.
Thanks.